kind of like lighten the mood, which is always a good thing. So just kind of curious, can you guess which of us are like VCs and which aren't?
Ouch.
I'm sorry?
Very easy.
Very easy? So I'm the obvious choice, right? No? But yeah, I think it's too bad that we all wear kind of suits, sort of suits today, so it's harder to tell apart. But
It's black versus white.
yeah, there you go. Okay, so I think this topic is, I mean, I don't want to say controversial, but it's kind of like generates quite a lot of debates, especially out here in Asia. And I mean, it's something I overheard, at several like soiree and parties, when you hear like investors talking. So I think it would be something that's quite good to bring it out in the open, and have a discussion. So for disclosure, we actually have a prior discussion to this event. And the reason we did that, because I know that it could be quite contentious, and it was kind of fun, actually. But at least, we could try to like make sure that by today, it will be a bit more informative, and there'll be hopefully some sort of agreement that we could come to somehow. So I think Jim introduced me already, so I'm just gonna go ahead and introduce have each of the panelists introduce themselves. We'll do Don last, if you don't mind. So maybe Keelok, please, you can go just a minute each, please.
Sure. I'm Keelok. I'm CEO of Vertex Venture. This is a venture capital subsidiary of Temasek. We invest in Asia with office in Beijing, Shanghai, Taipei, Bangalore, and Singapore.
Hi, I'm Reza BEHNAM. I'm the founder CEO of a company called Ad Central, which is a advertising platform focused on Asia Pac and specifically on Southeast Asia.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey Payne. I run a seed fund based in Singapore called Golden Gate Ventures. We invest in Southeast Asia mainly in the seed stage. Sometimes we do Series A.
My name is Dimitri. I'm the partner with Digital Media Partners. We are Singapore-based, Southeast Asia-focused, late A, early B, whatever that means according to our definitions fund, focused on consumer internet and bits and pieces of consumer internet infrastructure.
Okay, I think Don kind of like have a special introduction, so I'm kind of playing his trailer a bit first.
Okay. Well, my name is Don Sim, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Daylight Studios.
Singapore or what's happening in Singapore. Because if
or
we
Asia
start
Pacific too, I think.
in Asia Pacific, yes. Otherwise, I think what ends up happening is if we have a reference, which is the definition that everybody is used to, which is, you know, we're modeling this ecosystem after places like Silicon Valley, and then figure out which part of the system is working and which part are we lacking funds, ecosystem, resources, etc. That's my 2 cents.
Well,
So, I mean, if we go with the definition, the same definition as what Keylog has pegged, which is that at the seed stage, you are basically exploring ideas and you get a certain amount of money to do that. So for idea conceptualization, I think that's the point where you start to draw that kind of money. And when you head off to Series A, is when you finally decide on an idea and you start to build on that. We see, I mean, as an entrepreneur in Singapore, we see that isn't really the case here, at least. From most VCs that we've met, the expectations of what Series A is would be that a company, you are at a stage where your company is actually making money, and you have a good revenue, you have products that we're commercializing in several countries, and you know, there is almost a curve that can be plotted from where you are. And so I think if we look at the both kinds of, well, I would say honestly, Series A funding, yeah.
Relative calm here. I like that. Okay. So just from your perspective, you know, what do you think would be the 3 most important rounds? From investor perspective first, I think I would be curious to know.
Most important to whom?
For fundings, from your perspective.
Most important to the entrepreneur, to the fund?
Yep.
Ah, question for entrepreneurs then.
We'll do the fund first and then entrepreneur. Dimitri, since you're strangely quiet so far, I'll let you, because usually Dimitri, you know, he's really verbose. I mean, in the best of way.
We've pre-agreed that we will play by the same set of definitions. Well, I guess instead of answering your question as a proper panelist should, I'll just follow up on the previous one.
Okay.
So yes, seed round, very important, determines the idea, explains what the story is all about. Series A, according to the common definition, is supposed to build that product that Series B will scale. All good so far. I wouldn't speak to the entire Asia Pacific, but inside Southeast Asia, especially outside of Singapore, you have this scaling challenge of multiple countries, each of which can provide only so much demand. Unless you have an exceptional business model, most of the time, none of the countries in Southeast Asia can really give you massive scale. So I would say that within Series A, in Southeast Asia, you actually have 2 sub-series. Sometimes companies raise them all at once, sometimes it's like a double tap, 1 and 2. One amount, south of $1 million, sometimes $500,000, sometimes 700,000, goes to actually build that very product that is supposed to scale in its domestic market. Then there would be another amount, sometimes similar, that would be going to prove that that product can scale in more than one market. And only then the company has a clear shot at Series B guys who can do their thing and scale the thing that has been built. So I would venture to say that every round is important, but understanding of these 2 subsets of Series A and getting those 2 layers of ecosystems set up properly in Southeast Asia is what we are currently all failing to do. Thus, Southeast Asia Series A crunch as we know it. 2 crunches in one.
The other day, I think when we talked separately, I think the analogy you used was quite interesting, Reza. You were saying like trying to get a 1-liter engine to move at 180 kilometers an hour.
That was not mine. I would not claim it was not mine. Reza.
Yes.
So I think what Dimitri was just alluding to was that basically entrepreneurs in this part of the world really have to be opportunistic. Whenever there's money on the table, they'll just take it. And that's really because I feel, especially in this part of the world, there are very, very few specialist VCs I mean that in both senses of the word. In other words, there are very few venture capitalists, and venture capitalists by definition are people who are willing to take high risk for the promise of high reward. So there are very few people and very few institutions in that category. And then within that ecosystem, there are very few people who are specialists within, let's say, e-commerce or ad tech or cloud computing, et cetera, et cetera. So as a result, we see angels, we see people who are willing to put their own money where they're really passionate about, and occasionally we see some strategics, and occasionally we see some funds who are a little bit more well-versed in technology and digital, who spread their money around across various different subsectors to try to have a diversified approach. So as such, entrepreneurs have to be really opportunistic and really find either the angel that's really passionate or the VC who happens to know and is interested in that subsector, and really convince them to invest in their business. And a lot of times, because that risk averseness is around, and the true ventures, whether they're venture people, whether they're angels or institutional investors, are few and far between, what ends up happening is a lot of the risk-averse people who end up putting money in want you to go from idea stage to commercialization stage almost overnight. Show me the results, right? And therefore there's this expectation placed on the entrepreneur to monetize ASAP or as quickly as possible, and sometimes that comes at the risk of scaling properly or getting enough unique users or getting enough penetration in various different markets. And that's the analogy I was trying to make, is really trying to get a 1 liter engine to do 0 to 60 in 3 seconds. Well, it's almost impossible. So for entrepreneurs, it's even harder, I feel, in a market where the ecosystem is not ready to really support them as much as other places.
Yeah, just to add, I think this is one of the very unfortunate things in Asia, or maybe even Southeast Asia especially. In a typical company that if you build a company, there's always this thing I always say, to endpoint. You start what your idea, and then you tell yourself what you're trying to achieve. So these are 2 points. Yeah? So typically you must have 2 points, right? I want to be an advertising company, I want to be there, and then that's where I'm starting from, the 2 points. Between this point 1 to the end point, whatever the end point may be, there's a lot of steps. That's where many rounds of financing are required. So I'm not so sure I will be able to answer the question, what is the 3 most important rounds? Actually, every rounds are very important. Every round is, when we fund a company, or even when I was an entrepreneur, it's always, we ask ourselves, what I need to achieve before I get to the next round of financing. That's a milestone you must define. The milestone is very important. A lot of times, you define the milestone clearly, make sure your investors that come in understand the milestone. Because some people, if they don't understand the milestone, then that's it. You are talking different language here. So you must be very clear what is the milestone you're dealing with. For example, if it's a Series A company, you must be clear that at the end of this, using up this money, I have a product ready for commercialization. That's very clear. So what do you mean by product ready? So you must define that very clearly. Then after you raise Series B, what is the next step? What you must achieve? So every time, a lot of times, we find that a lot of entrepreneurs, they are not themselves also very clear. What is a milestone you must hit before the next round of financing? So therefore, because a lot of VCs are not really truly VCs, so there's a lot of confusion. What are you trying to achieve in the next round? And so that leads people to expect that you go from 0 to 80 miles an hour within 2 seconds, because they are not clear. They think that between A to end point, it's possible to do it in 12 months. But actually, you need about 5 to 6 steps before you get to that end point.
So by the way, because we kind of talk about how a lot of so-called VC that you meet, I think it's kind of glamorous to just say, oh, I'm an investor, I'm a VC. But I think, as these gentlemen attest, and my own experience, to truly find a real VC that really understand the business out here, I think the percentage is a bit smaller than you think. So I think sometimes that kind of skews the perspective, and makes you think that that's a reality because that's what they're telling you, But in the absolute sense, I think, and we kind of all have the same understanding. And by the way, I mean, I think all the VCs that sits up here are the real VC. I think that's why I invited them, as opposed to the non-real VC. But there are a bunch of real VCs out there as well. I think just have to find the right one. Jeffrey, I think you've had a lot of exposure with especially the seed round, early round companies. I kind of specifically like to know, from what you've seen around the region, especially in the gaming sector, do you think, there are substantial company that's worth, investing into earlier round, whether it be Series A or seed? I mean, from what you've seen.
In gaming or in
Yeah,
general?
in gaming.
In gaming. So I think before I say, before I add into the gaming thing, I think just to wrap up what all the speakers have been saying, I agree totally what they were saying. There are very few investors in town that have staying power, so this is the number one thing. They are a little bit too short-sighted than what you see in the West. Hence, there's always a tussle between innovation and making money now. I think this year there's going to be a lot of startups raising gap funding, so they're going to raise money to fulfill the milestones before Series A even care to look at them. So I agree with Dimitri, there are two different kinds of round, or maybe there's an advanced seed or seed 2, whatever.
So you're saying that out here, there seems to be more like a bridge type.
Yeah, and the reason is exactly what Kilok was saying. A lot of startups who raise the first round don't know what the Series A guys want. So they are more or less shooting in the dark. And most projections, like we all know, is always not correct, right? So even if you want to hit that milestones, chances are you won't. And let alone you don't even know what most Series A people want to look at. And it's very different. Different investors are different. B2C, B2B, B2B2C, marketplaces are all different. Different countries are different. And if most of you are in games, I can tell you many investors do not know how to invest in game companies, including me, right? So coming back to games, in the region, I've been looking at studios. I've been looking at BaaS. BaaS is the back-end as a service kind of stuff. Game engines, even server-side stuff. So game-related projects in the region, there are quite a few. Studios that sort of scrappily grow by himself, and then he form a team of 20, and then they make like 20, 30 USK a month, and getting probably 2 to 3 acquisition offers, but it's too low. I've heard that quite a few times. Studios where they build the engine and try to build 20 games in a month, that kind of thing, to make money as fast as possible. I've heard that also. So it all depends on what the investors like, right? So you either like a franchise game that goes big and then you have a certain cycle, or you like the multiple type, like you do many games and you try to see which one hit, and then you try to do and focus on that. It's extremely hard to do. I think game companies, studios in the room is extremely challenging to invest in, but I want to invest in one at least. So yeah.
So Don, since you're a game studio, I mean, how was the experience for you? I mean, you got seed, you got Series A, so that probably makes you somewhat exceptional.
Well, I think for gaming in general, I agree with Jeffrey. I think most VCs that we've met, and in angels or VCs, they don't really know how to invest, how to define whether a company is good. Basically, what they're looking at is some game companies like Gung Ho, for example, was making 80 million a single month or more, and they're excited about it. But the problem with these guys is that it's really hard, and also because the game studios, it's really hard for the investors to really pinpoint whether a game is good. What are the trackers? How do you define? Is the art good enough, or is the gameplay good enough, or is the analytics good enough? Can this company actually operate to be able to bring a game that is not making money at the start and then bring it to a game that's making a lot of money?
So in your case, what do you think was the 2-3 key points that convinced the investors to go into Series A with you, or even a seed round with you?
I think to clarify, I don't think that we have completely covered our entire Series A. I think for us, we are sort of, as what Dimitri was saying, the 2 steps in Series A. I think we've cleared the first one. We'll definitely be looking to do a second one after this. But one of the things that was particularly important for our company is the quality of our games. I think as founders, as one of the founders of the company, we have placed a heavy emphasis on that, and the investors, thankfully, who know a little bit more about the games, and thankfully the ones who invested did, can see that. And also the fact that we have been operating social games for about a year now. In Southeast Asia, about 2 million users, and we have that experience. We have the technology, we have the people to do it. And we have products that are about to launch. In fact, 3 products launching in Q2 and Q3. So I think we're at a stage where it's almost I would say, a pretty safe bet. Where you come in and you know that no matter what, there's going to be revenue somehow. So this is the experience that we've got. I mean, most of the investors that we met, they're asking, okay, so how much money are you making? How much money you expect to make? And how much money will I get back? And it's very standard questions, but I think what is the true point where you actually will want to put in money? I mean, like what Reza was saying is the focus generating unique users. And that's also an important thing for a game company, because getting enough users and then considering to monetize these guys is also a strategy. So I think many VCs don't understand this well enough. And definitely I agree with Jeffrey on this. Yeah.
One of the things, since we are in a gaming conference, this is one of the very interesting questions. Every time I hear people, I invested 3 companies in games, people say, oh, I like gaming sector. I say, which part? Actually, if you really know the gaming sector, there are multiple portions, right? Platform, publisher, and developer, right? So you first, which part? They say, isn't it all of them the same? No, they're different. The business model is different. Developer is different from publisher. Publisher is different from platform. The revenue model are different. You must understand which are you talking about. Now, some VC have certain view about platform versus publisher versus developer. That's fine. That's their philosophy. But first thing is first, that if you talk to some investor, they must understand this difference first. If the guy don't even know the difference between the 3, he will apply the platform to publisher to developer. You're going to be talking English to a Chinese-speaking guy. You don't know what the hell they're talking about at the same time. So that's one of the problems I find, that when people are raising money, or even investors, they don't themselves really understand it. So when they say, I want to invest in Unity, I like Unity is very good because it's as good as Zynga. You're talking apple to orange. You don't know what you're talking about. Unity and Zynga is 2 different worlds. So, but Unity is good. Zynga must be good. Kind of problem. They don't understand. You're talking about 2 different things, 2 different languages, and then a lot of time. As a result of that, there's a lot of this frustration when things are not hitting the milestone. They say, why are you not like Zynga? Why are you not like this, and so on and so forth. This is always a kind of problem.
Well, since we're talking about different language, I mean, would love to hear from Russian side. Ouch. So from your perspective, do you find, would game be something that your fund would be considering at all, or would it be something that's...
Well, first of all, there is, as previously mentioned, 1,000 of industries inside the word gaming.
Right.
And some industries Southeast Asia does not yet deserve, and some are already taking off and have multiple tens of millions in revenues a year, and we all know who they are. One would imagine that, well, most of the guys and ladies in the room who try to publish something into Southeast Asia would discover that acquiring, effectively converting traffic, getting payments without being ripped off, collecting cash, hiring people, all of this good stuff, not to mention IP, is pretty much, let's put it mildly, not straightforward. So I would imagine platforms that allow developers of games, whether they are in Singapore, whether they are in California, to access the Indonesian market, the Vietnamese market, and all of its different varieties, Philippines market, and so on, are still very much a flavor of the day. traditionally been done in a very manual manner. These days, a little bit more automation arrives. Fragmentation still rules, so I think for next couple of years, platform investing is something that is going to soak up another few tens of millions of dollars before we fix everything up. And before that, I wouldn't rush into developing unique content for Southeast Asia only, because monetizing that will be a massive pain in the neck.
For disclosure, I guess I have to say that DMP is one of the shareholders at a company I'm working for also, so that's a disclosure, just in case. And would we be considered a gaming play in your perspective?
You let game publishers access Southeast Asian market?
Okay. So there you have one on your portfolio.
Tell the world that we did it 3,000. Now that we're all here.
Should I really?
Yes, stories that help game
Yeah.
developers reach.
So basically, I'm currently working at MiG-33 as Jim introduced. So we basically mobile chat. We started out as a mobile chat company on feature phone, and then the product evolved into become much more social. Incorporating microblogging, chat rooms, and game service. But all that is on feature phone, and the company has been actually very successful in the emerging market, in countries like Indonesia, and some really exotic places like Syria, Iraq, Nepal, Bangladesh. And believe it or not, the companies actually are monetizing from all those countries that I just mentioned. So I think maybe that's what he found attractive, is that the company figure out a way to monetize from a really tough place to monetize. And the company is now making that pivot into a smartphone, and we're basically looking for game partners. So this is kind of like my little blurbs and sales pitch. And I think that's enough for me taking up that space. So I'll kind of come back to the Series A thing. Let's see. So I think I kind of. Okay. So we don't have to follow this all the way. So I guess let me ask Don and Reza first. I mean, based on what your personal encounter, with VCs out here, I mean, from your perspective, how many of them would you classify, or how many % of them would you classify them as being the VC in the way that you understand that they have set up in the Silicon Valley, versus investor, just investor?
Sure. I would classify very, very few. Probably, I could count them on one hand, in Singapore at least. So, and we have to be careful. I think there are venture capitalists. Or sort of seed funders. So there are more, I would say, incubators and seed funders in Singapore in particular, because of the government support that's been afforded to some of the incubators in this part of the world. So getting sort of the early $500,000 is not as hard as getting the next $1 to $5, $10 million. And in the $1 to $5, $10 million, there's, as I said, less than a handful of VCs who sort of fall into that definition. A couple of them are sitting at this table. And so, I think we've been talking a lot about the challenges, and we've painted a picture of doom and gloom. I want to change that a little bit.
Yes.
by saying, so what do you do? What does a game developer do? What does an entrepreneur do in this market if they're based here and if they want to reach out to a global or Asia-Pac audience? My personal 2 cents is, one, find an angel or an incubator who's really passionate about your space, because even if they don't have the full knowledge that you expect them to have, at least they have the passion. They're interested, right? They will try to find a network or add value in some way. So find passionate investors, whether they're incubators or seed capital, and then focus your attention on people who you get along really well with, because at the end of the day, the investor is funding the team in a lot of cases more than the idea. So find a person that understands you, understands how you tick, and has trust in you. And ideally, if you can find a person who trusts in you and knows the sector, well, that's the ideal situation. But in the case where you can't find that, find people who can trust the team and trust you, and there's that mutual trust. I think I don't want to put words in Keelok's mouth, but he's helped one of the companies, one of the more successful companies in Singapore, mainly because he knew the team from
For 10 years, yeah.
for 10 years, and so that helps, and so those are, I guess I would say, two quick tips for entrepreneurs who are trying to raise money. And again, you have to be somewhat opportunistic. It's good to be structured, but in some cases you might want to take an A1 round and find the A2 and not wait for the A2 to close the A1, and tricks like that, which you have to do in this part of the world.
I think part of an entrepreneur's job, besides raising money and making sure that your company is has enough runway for you to produce the results that you want to show. I think one of the things that we did in our company after we raised our first seed round with 3 angels was to educate them. I think the guys, when they came in, they were very passionate. They liked the team. They, as what Reza says, they invested into the team. But we also wanted them to understand what it is that is required for us to bring them the success that we promised them, and to explain to them what we are doing and what the market is, how the market is shifting, and eventually these guys started to bring in people that they thought would be relevant to us, and not just investors, not just VCs, but also business partners and all that. So I think
1 million or 2 million, whatever we did. But only difference is that I always very clear to the investor what we are trying to achieve the next milestone. I don't communicate the wrong message of I will be profitable tomorrow. If the guy say, oh, can you be profitable tomorrow? I say, yeah, I will be profitable one day, but not today. So that kind of very clear what I'm trying to achieve, and be very clear that this is he understands this milestone is important, and his money is going to get to this milestone. So if we did 500,000, 1 million, doesn't matter what the number is. But eventually, at some point in time, your milestone you hit is going to have a break. Once you have a break, this is one thing amazing about this business is that once you have hit the tipping point, you suddenly realize that you are the most popular guy in the whole world. Everybody wants to queue up outside your door, want to invest in your company, which happens to us. Everybody wants to invest. Some people just literally come and give you a check, say, can I invest? I buy $1 million worth of stock. I said, what the hell? No, but you were not there 2 years ago. But the issue is there's always way to raise enough money. But the important thing is not to do a lot of startup mistakes. Is that they communicate the wrong point. They tell the investor, oh, by giving me 1 million, I'm going to reach the moon. Guess what? You're not going to reach the moon. And then by the time 12 months later, when you run out of money, the guy say, what the hell? I'm still here, no? So that is the most important point. When you raise small money, that you must be very clear, clear to a certain extent that what you're trying to achieve in the next point.
Great, because you guys kind of like jumped to my next question, but I'm happy to hear this, because yeah, I mean, I think we don't want to just put on a doom and gloom, but I think it's more like, I think the purpose really is so you kind of know what you're dealing with, because I think if you don't know what you're dealing with, then obviously it's hard to prepare for. I mean, I think the reality is that, the investors that the classical way of investors that you understand may not, from the Silicon Valley, and a lot of them may not be here. So I think, you have to understand that's a circumstance you have, and you have to be a bit creative, and yeah, I mean, even gangster, in terms of like how you go about things. And I mean, from my own experience, I think bridge round is actually very important. I think that's a very good point, because, I think unless really, really good financially, I think a lot of time the projection tends to be off, and usually off not in a good way, but in a bad way. So, the money will run out probably sooner than later. And then what happened in between. So yeah, it's a tough thing. Since we're on
important point, this is an important point. This is actually patent pending. You all must pay me patent fees. A very important point. Investors always work in a club. That's the point you must always understand. Investors always is very clubby. So you must always figure out, there's always a pattern there. Which investor group always work together, which investor always work together. Individual also have the same kind of principle. You must figure out which are the club, and figure out which is the weak link in the club, and try to penetrate the weak link. Once you get the weak link inside, the rest all will queue up, and all will be following the club. It's very important. VC, the same thing. You don't think US VC firm is great, huh? US VC firm, same thing. I don't want to mention name. There's few firms that they always work in clubs. If this firm say yes, the other two will say yes too.
So in your club, who's a weak link?
No, that's my dad. There's always there's one that I always will say yes, and then the other guys will follow. It's very interesting. After a while you observe this. Individual, same thing. And one of the things that when my startup last time we did it, because I understand this philosophy. So when I talk to the people, I'm trying to figure out which is the cow, bell cow in the whole team, and then trying to go after the person or the group very hard until the person switch over.
Right, the weakest link. That's a lesson.
Well, strongest link, not weakest link.
Okay, let's see. Yeah, I think we kind of, so it's true, right? I call it a poo-poo combo platter. So I think what I've seen a lot here is VCs, they like to clump around together. I mean, well, not investors here, they like to clump around together, kind of like, I'll take the seed and I'll kind of throw in a Series A too, or like I'll do a Series A and I'll do a B also. Do you find that quite a lot? I mean, or is it just me?
I think it's more in the expectations in terms of going from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds that they lump it together, not so much the money. I mean, the money you get in drips and drabs for the most part, unless you have a more sophisticated investor who's willing to give you some more room to grow. So I think the expectations are lumped together, not necessarily the money.
Okay. Strangely quiet so far. So for this region, I mean, just off the top of your head, I mean, how many seed and Series A investors you know? I mean, just by rough numbers.
Seed being, remind me, please, the definition being real. My definition or the usual definition? So around about $50,000 to go from 2 people in the room to the idea. I'd say around Southeast Asia, I wouldn't say APAC, but a couple of hundred active ones. Singapore's government created single-handedly at least 50. And then you have your entrepreneurs who have achieved something and are operating out there, and younger sons and daughters of rich local families are notably among them. Series A or Series A plus? A dozen perhaps, I would say, off the top of my head, inside Southeast Asia, including Singapore, excluding Taiwan, Korea, and China, on which I'll defer to Kilok.
I think China there's a lot, India there's a lot. I think Southeast Asia there's a maximum handful. That's a problem. Yeah, that's an issue.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it all comes down to scale, right? You know, the reason why, you know, India in many ways is less developed, but their scale is there, the talent is there, and the promise of the scale is there. In Southeast Asia, we have a lot of fragments.
So can we say, because I think during the dinner, we talked about, you know, a couple of the sexy countries. So obviously China, India are the obvious ones. But I think for our region, it seems like Indonesia names comes up quite a lot. I mean, so is that a fair thing to say that Indonesia is one of the countries that a lot of investors would at least find some attraction to, if you have to focus on one country in this region, or?
Well, in terms of scale, yes. In terms of monetization, it's still small. Monetization per user, I'm talking about. So, but that's a country that some of the investors at this table have been involved in, so I'll let them speak.
Back to the topic of which model, which of many gaming industries we're talking about. 5 cents per user per month spent, or $50 per user per month spent? What pattern of behavior, what sort of mobile device? I wouldn't be so categorical as to say that Indonesia is above all. Sometimes Vietnam wins, sometimes Thailand wins. Sometimes you build a solution that actually works across 3 markets, but not other 2 for some mysterious reason. Southeast Asia is that way. But Indonesia, yes, does get a lot of limelight. So if you're dealing with investors from overseas, the US especially, you are best served if you have one of the more popular countries on the pages of New York Times recently among your target markets.
I think that one of the biggest challenge for entrepreneur is this, I must say. How to explain to a bunch of guys who across the table who are potential investor what you're trying to do in 5 slides. That is the hardest thing. A lot of time entrepreneur, because they are so so much deep into their own business, they will take them 50 slides before they actually finally get to the point. But most investors will lose interest on the number 6 slide. So that's a problem. So that sometimes when we hear presentation, I will tell you, hey, look, can you get to the point? Are you in the mobile space? Are you in what space? Can you be more precise? Now, so one of the things that is very important that I always remember is you must explain a thing in trying to get to the point quickly, and at the same time trying to draw the imagination quick. You know, not trying to hype. Hype is people will see through hype very fast. You're trying to get to the imagination. If you're advertising space, you have to get to the point very quickly. Why is this important? Very quickly. And then the guy must get to the point, and then so they understand. Then thereafter, you can go into detail, explaining the detail, why is DSP important versus whatever. You know, so you must explain the point very clearly so people understand the point. Because investors on the other side usually are not specialists, and they do not understand. And then if you try to explain your business in 50 slides, I think most of the time they will lose interest, and a lot of these guys will just say, oh, you know, you're just full of crap. You know.
We're coming toward the last 5 to 10 minutes. I will kind of open up the floor a bit to the audience. You know, and anyone have a questions you'd like to ask the gentlemen up here? Wow. Either I really made it confusing or we made it really thorough.
Questions?
So hi, I have a startup obviously. So I wanted to ask, right? So in Southeast Asia, generally, if Series A is really tough to get, so would you advise people to head over to overseas to raise their Series A? I met somebody from the Valley, and you know the advice that they are telling me is, hey, you know, why don't you go over to the Valley and stay for the summer, and you know go all out to fundraise? I mean, I would like to hear your opinions on that and the difficulties that you foresee, you know, for startups in Southeast Asia raising from, you know, people from the Valley.
I will speak from my own experience. I raised money before, so I must tell you, one of the questions that till today I still don't have answers is I went to present to in the company we started, the Comedering. We went to see all the 5 top VC firms. All of them very polite because through my connection, they all listened to my pitch. You know, I was well coached. The guy told me, first slide must hit the point, so I hit the point, everything else. So one of the guys, wow, very polite, he smiled a lot. And he's a very famous VC. And then he said, Kilok, I want to understand one question. You came from good background, you know what you're doing. Asia, a lot of money. Why the hell you are here? Basically, he said that, why don't you raise money from your part of your world? Why do you need to come here? Actually, I have no answers. Till today, I still do not know how to answer this question. And the answer is, no idea what is the answers. So, but you cannot possibly be answering a question with a negative point, right? Or because the Asian VCs are stupid, they don't know what they're talking about. By the time you finish saying that way, the guy will say, this guy, he probably talk back about me the same thing. So you must always understand, first rule of answering question is never give a negative answer. Even you don't have an answer, you just say, that's a good question. You know, I also want to know the answers too. Can you give me answers? Actually, I have the answer. The answer is exactly, the Asian VC are stupid. They know what they're talking about half the time. But you can't do that, right? So end up, do it. So what I think some of these entrepreneurs have said is, you have no choice. You, like or not, you're stuck here. So you have to find a way through other ways to raise small money, $500,000, $1 million, or $2 million, whatever that is, and then be clear what you're trying to hit on milestone and step by step. Because if you try to go to Silicon Valley, trying to start up there, this is a question everybody's going to ask. Because your accent, everybody is going to figure out that you're not from here. They will ask you, why are you here? And then definitely you will never pass the first test.
To add to Kilok's point, I actually tried raising money for my startup in the Valley because I used to live there, so I know the ecosystem. And what I realized, the big lesson was, while technology is scalable and borderless, funding is a very local phenomenon. And most of the VCs in the Valley, number one, don't understand this region. You know, try having them point out Singapore on a map for you. It'll take them 5 minutes. Second issue is for governance reasons, as well as, you know, VCs have agreements with their investors called the LPs, right? And in the LPs usually restrict them from placing money, in general I'm talking about, money outside of that geographic area. So there are very few VCs, there are, I would say, a handful of VCs in the US who are doing Asia investments. And so the key is to try to look at those guys. But the answer to your question, I think, also depends on where are your key markets. If your key market is global, then you might as well base your company in the US and have access to that kind of funding. So it really depends on the strategy. But raising money from there for a company here to focus on Southeast Asia seems like a stretch.
Well, maybe I'm looked towards as a source of good news, but the good news for Series A crunch situation in Southeast Asia, and specifically for gaming industry, is that there is a rumble in the ground of money from all over the world moving to Southeast Asia, some incredibly slowly. I'm looking at you, Japan. Some of that even slower because the big US funds are too disciplined to move quickly. recently, the answers started coming in from all sorts of unusual places. I'm
Russia.
thinking Turkey, I'm thinking Ukraine of all places, Kazakhstan, yes, Russia, I just didn't want to mention,
I'll help you
and
with
quite
that.
a few other recently emerged digital markets. If you think about pitching a story that makes money in Thailand, has a little bit of traction in the Philippines and tries to enter Vietnam, explaining that story to a guy who made money in Turkey or Kazakhstan is sometimes surprisingly much easier than to a gentleman who runs $1 billion fund out of San Francisco or to a corporate executive out of Tokyo. So that's both, I guess, the answer to your question and my contribution to the previous discussion as to whether the good news are coming. Yes, they are. I would imagine another 20 Series A funds here in the next 5 years, and they would mostly come from very exotic geographies.
Cool.
And they want trial investments, and they want to find out what is going on, so they do not mind taking a relatively risky bet on a startup they do not quite understand in a market they do not quite know, because they want to learn.
Yeah, I think, but the first question, the first qualifying question is, do you invest in this part of the world? That's the first qualifying question, because rather than spend a lot of time going to see them, that, you know, you could do that over email really quickly.
Okay, this topic I have some experience in. A good portion of our fund comes from Silicon Valley, so majority of them are serial entrepreneurs. So the reason they invest in us is because they kind of like know what Southeast Asia is, but they don't really want to visit, but they know that something is happening, and they're like, okay, you go do it for us. So there is interest, but it depends on what you're talking about. So back to your question, it depends. If you're raising money there to focus on Southeast Asia, chances are you'll not get very far. Likely going to be angels or 500 startups, besides a few others. If you want to move to the US, that's a different thing, and raise money there, but your team comes from here. That's a different thing. Number one, you must have the mindset to move to the US. Number two, don't forget about competition, because nobody knows you there. And reference checking in the Valley is extremely important. So if nobody knows you or you don't network well enough, they don't connect the dots, chances are you'll not raise money. Yeah, so one example is one of our portfolios, Nitrous, right? So they were originally from here, but their product is for developers, so there's no point staying here. So what we did is we helped them raise, $1 million in the US within 3 weeks, and now most of the founders have moved. So that's kind of rare, but sometimes that needs to happen. So just to be sure, you need to know why you want to raise money there and whether you want to move or not.
Okay, unfortunately, we ran out of time. You can definitely, try to catch any of these guys once they're on their way down. So I just want to extend my thanks and gratitude to all of you for participating. And actually, I think somehow we actually got something good out of this, I hope. Yeah, so please give a round of applause to all the panelists.